I'm Larry O'Connor alongside Brian Wilson.
The terrible events in Paris were obviously a terrible and sickening setback.
That's how the president described it at the G20 summit in Turkey. Just on Friday he had said ISIS was contained. Now he says, well, we did have this setback. That's what he called the attacks in Paris. And now the question turns to refugees. The president wants to bring in 10,000 Syrian refugees to this country. And 27 governors around the country have said, you know what, we don't want those refugees. We have some concern that some of them might be terrorists, as they were in the situation in France. Joining us now on the line is former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And thank you for joining us this morning, because I'd like to know what you think Congress should do about this.
Well, this is a clear case where Congress should cut off the funding and say absolutely no, we're not going to allow the president to spend taxpayer money bringing in people who may well be terrorists. Let's start with the number one fact about the Paris attack. There were 8 terrorists who killed 129 people and wounded over 300. 8. Now, the president says, well, we can bring in 20,000 because we're going to vet them. First of all, that's a lie. We do not have the intelligence information to vet these people. It is simply a falsehood for the president or the administration to suggest that we could safely vet them. But let's say we only have a 1% error rate. That would be 200. Now, that's 20 times the number, 25 times the number it took to commit the Paris massacre. And how can anybody guarantee that we're above 99% accurate? Is anyone listening to me driving to work in the federal government today believe that we are capable of being above 99% accuracy in vetting people from an area where we have no adequate intelligence?
I think you make a good point, but getting back to this thing about what Congress should do, you say cut off funding. Let me just
cut off the funding.
Well, hang on, let me ask you.
They have to have, by December 11th, I believe it is, they have to have another continuing resolution.
Right, I understand.
You simply write into it that no money can be spent by the executive branch for the purpose of bringing in Syrian refugees until the Congress has approved a plan. Now, not the president certifies, that's baloney. But until the Congress approves, and frankly, the Congress ought to include the governors in it, because they're the people who are the front line of dealing with this. Mm-hmm. And it tells you something that even Democratic governors are now coming out and saying they don't want these folks in their state.
Well, but that means the president would veto it, and then Mr. Speaker, please let me finish my question. Okay. That leads us to a possible government shutdown. Is this one of those cases where it's worth the fight?
A president of the United States who went to the American people saying, I am shutting the government down so I can bring in Syrian refugees, after the last Friday night in Paris, I suspect would be roundly condemned by the American people and roundly condemned by most of his own party.
Yeah, let's have that fight. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how could he assert that bringing in Syrian refugees at a time when we've had this massacre in Paris is such a high priority that he's prepared to close the government in order to bring in Syrian refugees? Then let's see the 3 Democratic presidential candidates line up with him and say, yes, let's have the 2016 election on the issue of whether or not we should make America as vulnerable as possible and maximize the risk to the American people.
One wonders how that would go over in Ohio or in Florida, for example.
Yeah. Or anywhere. I mean, I don't think once they think about it, even in Bernie Sanders' Vermont, people will be all that enthusiastic. If they are, we could send 20,000 Syrian refugees to Vermont and let them cope with the consequences.
Speaker Gingrich, we're hearing from the president and many other Democrats and frankly a few Republicans too, kind of a sanctimonious tone suggesting that accepting these refugees is what America is all about. This is in just one word you can hear the president's tone yesterday.
That's shameful.
Shameful for you to take the position that you have. And I'm seeing people saying, Jesus, Joseph and Mary were Middle Eastern refugees seeking shelter, and they were turned away in Bethlehem by the innkeepers. I would love for you to respond to that.
I mean, first of all, why wasn't the president excited and thrilled and reaching out to bring in Christian refugees from all over the region where they're being slaughtered?
Well, the Ukraine, for that matter, yes.
Huh?
Or the Ukraine, yeah.
Yeah, it never occurred to him. It wasn't a big deal. After all, they were only Christians. Second, where does it start? I mean, if you want to say, what are the grounds? Misery, okay, we have lots of people in Darfur who could come from Sudan. We have lots of people in Yemen who would like to come. We have more Somalians who would like to come. I mean, you realize how many places around the planet are generating refugees because of the collapse of civilization? And the Gallup estimated in their world poll that 160 million people would like to come to the U.S. By the way, only 6 million of them were from Mexico. 154 million from the rest of the world. Now, is the president going to argue that, why is 20,000 the magic number? Under the president's non-shameful policy of total compassion, why isn't he accepting 3 or 4 or 5 million? This is just one of those nonsense rhetorical arguments where the left thinks if they scream guilt long enough, that Republicans and conservatives are going to flinch. And I think we ought to stand firm and say the number one duty of the government of the United States is to defend America, to protect Americans, and to recognize that we are engaged in a global war with an opponent which is not just ISIS, it's not just Syria, but it's on the Internet, and it is. That's why you had a terrorist in California, which is what he should have been called, stabbing 4 people the other day.
Yeah.
I mean, he's part of the same movement as Paris and the Russian airliner and the Lebanese bombings, all of which occurred within the last week.
Can we talk about the real-world politics here, what's going to happen over the next several days here in Washington, D.C.? This is Speaker Ryan's first big test, isn't it, Speaker Gingrich? You've known his career for a while now. What do you think he's going to do?
Well, I think he's very calm and methodical. He's going to think this through. I think his instinct is exactly to cut off the funding. I think he has said so publicly. He's going to win the vote handily in the House, and frankly, if the American people are mobilized and start to bring pressure on the Democrats, you're going to see a lot of Democrats suddenly decide that, there's a good reason that the governor of New Hampshire suddenly decided that she did not want Syrian refugees in New Hampshire. She's running for the U.S. Senate, and she knows that this would be an issue that would kill her. I mean, if she said, we're thrilled to have Syrian refugees in New Hampshire, send us a couple thousand more, her Senate race would be over.
Well, and one imagines that if you're a Democrat running for the nomination for the presidency, you may say that you support the import of these Syrian refugees, but given the backlash that has occurred, and 27 governors are now saying this is a bad idea and we don't want them here, I don't know how you can win the presidency if you hold that position.
Look, there's an easy test for the 3 Democratic candidates for president. Would you impose Syrian refugees on those 27 governors? I mean, They got to go somewhere. So are you prepared to impose on governors to say no? Now, I'd be very curious to see if any of the 3 say yes, they would. And if they wouldn't, what you've got, of course, they're trapped because the ideological, multicultural, non-judgmental, unilateral disarmament left absolutely is adamant about doing everything possible to bring everybody possible to America. And so they can't jump up and down and pretend that they're conservatives and be in place defending America first, because in their party that would also get them killed. So they have a nomination problem if they are for defending America as their first principle, and they have a general election problem if bringing in Syrians without vetting them is their first principle.
All right. Well, Mr. Speaker, it is always enlightening and always a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's great talking with you, and I just wanted to say I do hope the Congress is going to act in a direct way, and I hope that they're going to have the courage to take the president head on, and I don't see how he can win this fight.
Newt Gingrich, thank you very much.